In trading, nothing tests a person more deeply than the ability to wait. Not because waiting is difficult in itself, but because the mind naturally rebels against uncertainty. It wants action, movement, confirmation, anything that creates the illusion of control. Yet the paradox of trading is that the more a trader tries to control the market, the more the market exposes the truth. Control does not exist outside of oneself. What can be controlled is the internal dialogue, the emotional response to risk, and the belief system that shapes every decision. Learning to wait for the signal is not merely a technique, it is a psychological transformation. Waiting begins with trust, not in the market, but in your edge. A signal, by definition, is a moment when the conditions align in a way that historically gives you a favorable probability. But if your mind is conditioned by fear, impatience, or the need to be right, even a perfect signal will feel uncomfortable. You will either jump too early to avoid missing out, or hesitate until the opportunity is already gone. This internal conflict is not a problem with your system, it is a problem with the beliefs that govern your perception of risk. To wait patiently, those beliefs must evolve. Most traders unconsciously associate waiting with lost opportunity. Every candle that forms feels like a possibility slipping away. But in reality, every moment you wait without a signal is a moment you preserve capital, maintain emotional clarity, and protect your psychological equilibrium. The ability to do nothing is one of the most powerful skills a trader can develop, because doing nothing is often the most strategic choice. The market will always offer opportunities, but not every moment is an opportunity. Understanding this difference is where patience transforms into discipline. The key is to redefine what it means to take action. Action in trading is not pressing a button, it is aligning your mind with the probabilities. It is reinforcing the idea that the market does not owe you a setup, and you do not have to chase one. When your belief system accepts that missing a trade is irrelevant compared to taking a low-quality one, waiting becomes effortless. You no longer feel pressure to predict. Instead, you allow the market to reveal the conditions you require. Learning to wait also requires emotional neutrality. Impatience is a form of emotional discomfort, an urge to escape uncertainty. But uncertainty is the natural state of the market. When you learn to coexist with uncertainty without reacting to it, you free yourself from emotional impulses. You begin to observe with clarity, respond with confidence, and act only when the market gives you a true signal. At that point, waiting is no longer a struggle. It is part of your identity as a disciplined trader. The real mastery lies in realizing that waiting is not passive. It is active alignment with your edge. It is a psychological commitment to consistency. It is the quiet strength that separates those who survive the markets from those who surrender to them. Patience is often misunderstood in trading because it appears on the surface to be an inactive state. Many traders imagine patience as doing nothing, a kind of forced stillness that feels uncomfortable when the market is moving rapidly. But the essence of patience is not passivity. It is a psychological edge formed through inner alignment, emotional neutrality, and a deep trust in one's system. Patience is the trader's silent weapon, the advantage that cannot be seen on a chart or quantified in a backtest, yet determines the long-term outcome of every strategy, no matter how technically sound. To understand patience as an edge, one must first understand that trading is not a battle against the market, it is a battle against one's own impulses. The market does not tempt, mislead, or seduce, it simply moves. It is the trader's perception of these movements that creates the emotional friction. When someone learns to cultivate patience, they are not resisting the market, they are mastering their internal reactions to it. A trader without patience becomes a trader controlled by impulses. Every fluctuation appears meaningful, Eve. Wry wiggle of price seems like a potential opportunity, and every moment feels like a threat of missing out. Such a trader is not operating from a place of confidence or clarity, but from emotional tension. This tension leads to premature entries, overtrading, chasing, and ignoring predefined rules. In this state, even if the market provides a perfect setup, the trader's mind is too unsettled to see it clearly. In contrast, a patient trader is not influenced by the noise. Patience creates space between observation and action. It allows the trader to watch the market form structures, test levels, accelerate or slow down, without feeling compelled to intervene. This space is what turns analysis into precision. Without patience, the ability to read the market deteriorates. With patience, the trader can see not only the setups, but the psychological dynamic unfolding behind price movement. Patience is also a form of psychological leverage because it gives the trader control over timing. Timing is the difference between entering a trade when probability is aligned versus entering when the market is simply moving. Many traders believe that edge comes from strategy alone, but strategy morale. So, why defines opportunity? Patience determines whether that opportunity is captured under the right conditions. If a trader enters too early, they distort the risk profile of the trade. If they enter too late, they reduce profit potential and increase psychological pressure. Only patience removes the urge to predict and replaces it with the discipline to wait for confirmation. When a trader can wait for the exact moment where the signal aligns with their rules, they are not gambling, they are expressing consistency. This consistency builds confidence, and confidence is the foundation upon which professional trading is built. Patience is not natural because the human mind is wired to avoid uncertainty. Uncertainty creates emotional discomfort, and the instinctive reaction to discomfort is to escape it through action. In trading, action feels like relief because it gives the illusion of control. Pressing the buy or sell button creates a temporary sense of certainty, even if the decision is impulsive. But this relief is always temporary because the market does not care about the trader's emotional state. Without patience, the trader becomes reactive, constantly shifting between fear, hope, frustration, and excitement. The mind becomes chaotic, and the trader becomes a follower of price instead of a follower of probability. True patience requires the ability to sit with discomfort without acting on it. This is the core psychological skill of professional traders. They understand that discomfort is not a signal to react, but a signal to observe the mind's resistance to uncertainty. To cultivate patience as an edge, a trader must develop a belief system that supports waiting. This means internalizing the idea that opportunities are infinite, but capital is finite. When a trader believes they must catch every move, they are operating from scarcity. Scarcity triggers fear, and fear destroys patience. But when a trader believes that missing a trade is irrelevant compared to taking a low-quality one, they shift into abundance thinking. Abundance thinking neutralizes the emotional urge to chase, and waiting becomes a natural behavioral pattern. A trader with this mindset does not fear watching the market move without them because they know another opportunity will arise. This internal certainty is what transforms patience from a forced behavior into an effortless habit. Patience is also the mechanism that reinforces discipline. A trader can have the best rules in the world, but without patience, those rules are meaningless. Every rule requires time for conditions to align, and only patience provides that time. When a trader is patient, they are giving their rules the respect they deserve. They wait for validation, for confirmation, for alignment. This waiting is not empty, it is purposeful. It is an active engagement with the market that requires continuous awareness, calmness, and intention. A patient trader is not idle. They are observing structure, monitoring volatility, assessing volume, and evaluating context. They are mentally preparing to execute when the correct moment appears. In this sense, patience is the bridge between analysis and execution. Another dimension of patience as an edge is its ability to conserve psychological energy. Trading is mentally expensive. Every impulsive decision drains focus, clarity, and emotional stability. A trader who takes 10 unnecessary trades is mentally exhausted long before the real setup appears. When the actual opportunity comes, they are either too fatigued to take it or too frustrated from prior low SSEs to trust it. This is how impatience destroys edge. A patient trader, however, preserves mental capital. They do not waste energy on irrelevant fluctuations. They remain emotionally fresh, psychologically stable, and cognitively sharp. When the signal finally emerges, they execute with confidence because their mind is not clouded by noise. Patience also enhances risk management. When a trader waits for a high-quality signal, the stop-loss placement becomes clearer, the targets become logical, and the trade structure becomes more coherent. Poor entries often require wider stops, faster adjustments, and more emotional resilience. Proper entries, made through patience, require less intervention because they align with the natural rhythm of the market. In this sense, patience reduces risk not by avoiding trades, but by improving trade quality. The most profound aspect of patience as an edge is that it shifts the trader from outcome-based thinking to process-based thinking. When a trader is focused on outcomes, they become reactive to every tick. They judge themselves by wins and losses, creating emotional volatility. But patience forces the trader to honor the process. It requires them to follow rules, respect probabilities, and wait for alignment. This shift removes emotional attachment to individual trades and places emphasis on consistent execution. When process becomes the focus, results naturally follow because the trader is acting with clarity rather than emotion. Patience is not something that can be forced. It is something that emerges from internal alignment. It arises when a trader fully accepts the nature of the market, the nature of probability, and the nature of their own emotional patterns. When these elements are aligned, patience becomes effortless. And once it becomes effortless, it becomes a permanent psychological edge. A signal only becomes meaningful when it is supported by genuine trust in your predefined edge. And this trust is not something that appears automatically, just because you have a strategy written on paper. Many traders believe that having rules, indicators, or criteria is enough to create consistency, but the real challenge begins when those rules meet uncertainty. A signal represents probability, not certainty, and the mind is naturally uncomfortable with anything that does not guarantee an outcome. Without internal truth, even the clearest, most well-tested signal becomes blurred by emotional interference. You may see the setup, recognize it intellectually, understand what it means, and still hesitate, second-guess, or sabotage the moment. Trust is what transforms observation into action. The human mind is wired to evaluate threats, avoid loss, and protect itself from emotional pain. In trading, those protective mechanisms often work against the trader. A signal that you have defined as part of your edge may show up perfectly, but if past losses are still emotionally charged, or if your belief about your ability to execute is weak, your mind will generate doubt. You might start analyzing price movement in ways that aren't part of your rules, looking for reasons to avoid acting, or convincing yourself that this time is different. This is not a failure of the strategy. The strategy has already done its job by identifying probability. It is the lack of trust in the edge that prevents execution. Trust is built through repetition, but it is sustained through belief. For many traders, the problem isn't that their edge doesn't work. It's that they haven't developed the psychological confidence to accept the outcomes associated with it. A predefined edge will always include losing trades because losses are part of the statistical distribution. If a trader cannot emotionally accept those losses, then every signal becomes a battle between logic and fear. The trader may alter the rules, adjust entries impulsively, or exit early because the discomfort of uncertainty overrides the intention to follow the plan. In this state, the signal loses its power because the trader is not aligned with the probabilities. When trust is present, everything changes. The trader no longer evaluates each signal in isolation. They view it as one occurrence within a large sample size. A single trade becomes insignificant relative to the long-term expression of edge. This shift removes emotional pressure. Acting on a signal no longer feels like a risk to one's ego or sense of safety. It becomes a neutral task. You wait for conditions, you see them appear, and you execute without emotional debate. This is what professional traders mean when they talk about mechanical execution. The mechanics do not come from rigid, robotic behavior. They come from deep internal trust that the system will produce positive EXP, expectancy over time. To trust a signal, a trader must understand not just what the edge is, but why it works. Many traders skip this step. They learn a pattern, an indicator combination, or a price action sequence and immediately begin trading it without internalizing its logic. Because their understanding is shallow, their trust is fragile. The moment the strategy encounters a string of losses, which every strategy inevitably will, the trader's belief collapses. They start modifying the system, looking for new indicators, or abandoning the edge entirely. This behavior is not caused by the market. It is caused by the lack of a strong internal model of why the edge has validity. True trust emerges from knowledge, not from hope. Another obstacle to trusting signals is the emotional attachment to missing opportunities. Many traders focus so heavily on catching every move that they become obsessed with predicting market behavior. Prediction requires certainty, but a signal requires patience. These two mental states cannot coexist. A trader who believes they must predict will not wait for confirmation. They will anticipate the signal before it appears, entering prematurely to avoid missing out. When they get punished by the market, they blame the setup, not the lack of trust. But the truth is simple. Acting before the signal means acting outside the edge, and acting outside the edge removes any statistical advantage. Trust requires letting go of the need to anticipate and replacing it with a willingness to follow. Trust also influences how a trader interprets market noise. Without trust, every small fluctuation feels meaningful, every candle seems like a threat to the setup, and every minor retracement looks like an invalidation. The trader becomes hypersensitive to noise because their mind doesn't feel grounded in a stable belief system. With trust, noise becomes irrelevant. You stop reacting emotionally to fluctuations and instead focus on whether the conditions that define your edge are intact. This detachment is not indifference, it is clarity. It allows the trader to see what matters and ignore what doesn't. To strengthen trust in your predefined edge, it is essential to detach from short-term outcomes. Many traders try to build trust by winning trades, but this is backward. If trust depends on winning, then it will collapse the moment a loss occurs. Losses are inevitable. And if they shake your belief, you will never be able to execute consistently. The correct approach is to trust the edge because of its long-term expectancy, not because of a recent streak of results. A trader who can maintain trust during losing periods possesses a psychological advantage that most others lack. This resilience is what allows the edge to express itself over time. Another factor that shapes trust is self-image. If a trader does not see themselves as someone capable of disciplined execution, their actions will reflect that belief. They might know the signal is correct, but still fail to execute because they have not yet developed the identity of a consistent trader. Trust in the edge and trust in oneself are interconnected. You cannot fully trust the system if you do not trust your own ability to follow it. Building this internal alignment requires self-honesty, emotional awareness, and the willingness to confront habits that undermine consistency. Ultimately, a signal derives its power from the psychological state of the trader. The market doesn't care whether you trust your edge or not. It will continue to move in accordance with supply and demand. What matters is whether you can align your mind with your system consistently enough to allow the probabilities to play out. When trust is present, signals become clear, execution becomes clean, and trading becomes a process instead of a struggle. Impatience in trading is not caused by the market. It is caused by a trader's emotional discomfort with uncertainty. The charts, the indicators, the price movements, none of these create impatience by themselves. What creates impatience is the mind's inability to sit calmly in a state where outcomes are unknown. The human brain naturally seeks patterns, predictability, and immediate resolution. When faced with ambiguity, it generates internal tension. In trading, that tension shows up as the urge to act before the market presents a valid opportunity. This urge feels powerful, not because the market demands action, but because the mind wants relief from the discomfort of waiting. Uncertainty triggers the same psychological mechanisms that evolved to protect humans from danger. In prehistoric environments, uncertainty meant risk, and hesitation could be fatal. The modern trading environment, although not physically dangerous, still active at. So those ancient responses, the mind interprets uncertainty as a threat, pushing the trader to take action in an attempt to gain a sense of control. The irony is that this instinctive reaction works against the trader's best interests. When the mind seeks control, the trader loses control over their discipline. When the mind seeks relief, the trader takes impulsive trades. Impatience is simply emotional discomfort expressed through premature action. This discomfort arises most intensely when a trader has not fully accepted the nature of probability. Even if someone understands intellectually that the market is uncertain, they may not have internalized it emotionally. Emotional acceptance is very different from intellectual acknowledgement. Until uncertainty becomes emotionally acceptable, the mind will continue to resist it. That resistance shows up as internal pressure, as restlessness, as the feeling of needing to enter a trade. The trader may think they are responding to market signals, but they are actually responding to emotional discomfort. When discomfort becomes the driving force behind decision-making, rational analysis deteriorates. A trader who cannot tolerate waiting will begin to interpret price movement in a distorted way. They will see signals where none exist, exaggerate the importance of minor fluctuations, or convince themselves that a mediocre setup is good enough. The mind is not looking for probability, it is looking for justification to act. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The more discomfort a trader feels, the more impulsively they act. The more impulsively they act, the more negative outcomes they experience. The more negative outcomes they experience, the greater their emotional discomfort becomes. The cycle repeats until the trader either becomes aware of the pattern or destroys their capital. Impatience also emerges from the fear of missing out. The market's constant movement creates the illusion that opportunities are everywhere and that any hesitation will lead to loss. This illusion taps into a deeper psychological narrative. the belief that value is tied to participation. When a trader believes that every move must be captured, uncertainty becomes unacceptable because it implies the possibility of missing something. Missing something feels like a failure. That emotional reaction triggers impatience, which then drives forced action. FOMO is not about the market, it's about the trader's relationship with opportunity, value, and self-worth. Another layer of impatience comes from the emotional residue of past trades. If one recently experienced a loss, they may feel an urgency to recover quickly. This urgency translates into impatience because the mind wants relief from the emotional pain of the loss. If someone recently experienced a win, they may feel an inflated sense of confidence, leading to impatience because the mind wants to capitalize on perceived momentum. In both cases, impatience overrides discipline because the mind is focused on emotional resolution, not on following probabilities. The market becomes a tool for emotional management instead of a field for strategic execution. Impatience is also heavily influenced by a trader's beliefs about time. Many traders operate with the subconscious assumption that trading requires constant activity to be productive. They equate action with progress, believing that sitting on the sidelines is wasted time. This belief creates chronic impatience because the mind feels obligated to trade, not because the market provides opportunities, but because inactivity feels unproductive. In reality, the most profitable periods for traders are often the periods in which they wait. Waiting is not inactivity, it is preparation. But if a trader's belief system equates waiting with stagnation, then impatience becomes inevitable. To understand impatience deeply, one must observe how discomfort transforms perception. When the mind is uncomfortable, it narrows its focus. It becomes hypersensitive to movement, to potential triggers, to anything that might offer relief. This narrowing is the opposite of what effective trading requires. Trading requires calm observation, broad awareness, and the ability to see context. Impatience collapses context and replaces it with urgency. This urgency blinds the trader to risk, blinds them to the quality of the setup, and blinds them to the bigger picture. Impatience does not merely speed up action, it distorts perception. The antidote to impatience is not forcing yourself to wait. Forcing patience is resistance, and resistance increases discomfort. The real solution is to resolve the underlying emotional discomfort associated with uncertainty. When uncertainty becomes acceptable, waiting becomes neutral. It no longer feels like something to endure, it becomes something natural. This internal acceptance allows the trader to remain calm during periods with no signals. The mind stops searching for relief because it no longer perceives waiting as a threat. When waiting becomes neutral, the trader gains the ability to see the market clearly. A trader who accepts uncertainty does not feel the urge to act prematurely. They do not feel anxious when the market moves without them. They do not interpret waiting as weakness or stagnation. They observe without reacting, analyze without forcing, and act only when their predefined conditions align. Their patience is not a behavior, it is a psychological state. They are not resisting discomfort. They are simply not experiencing it. This emotional neutrality is the foundation of disciplined trading. It is what allows a trader to remain consistent in an environment that constantly tempts them to act impulsively. Impatience is not a flaw, it is a signal. It signals where the trader's beliefs are misaligned with the realities of the market. It signals where emotions are influencing perception. It signals where internal work is required. Understanding this transforms impatience from a problem into a teacher. It reveals the parts of the trader's psychology that need refinement. When these internal conflicts are resolved, impatience dissolves naturally, because the mind no longer seeks relief from uncertainty. Waiting is one of the most powerful forms of protection a trader has, because every moment you choose not to act without a clear signal is a moment you protect your capital, your emotional equilibrium, and your long-term consistency. Most traders think of risk only in terms of stop losses, lot size, or volatility, but psychological risk, the risk of acting from impatience, fear, or impulse, is far more dangerous. Every low-quality trade is taken not because the market forced it, but because the trader could not wait. Waiting, therefore, becomes a defense mechanism. It shields you from yourself, from your impulses, from your unexamined emotional triggers, and from your subconscious need to feel involved in the market at all times. When waiting becomes internalized as part of your identity as a trader, you naturally filter out noise and only engage with the market when your edge is fully present. Most traders underestimate how much capital is lost not from bad analysis but from impatience. A single low-quality trade might not seem significant, but it begins a psychological cascade. Once you enter a trade that doesn't meet you, our criteria, the structure of your mindset shifts. You become attached to the outcome because you know the decision wasn't rooted in discipline. You begin managing the trade emotionally instead of mechanically. You tighten stops prematurely, widen them irrationally, take profits too soon, or hold losses too long, all because the foundation of the trade was unstable. A low-quality trade is unstable by nature. It is built on hope, fear, or impulse, not on probability. This instability magnifies every fluctuation in price, turning the trader into a reactive participant instead of a strategic observer. By waiting for high-quality conditions, you eliminate the instability before it begins. Waiting also protects your mental capital, which is just as important as financial capital. Every impulsive trade drains emotional energy. It creates frustration, regret, and self-doubt. These emotions accumulate, clouding judgment and making future decisions even harder. When the mind is fatigued, it becomes more susceptible to emotional triggers and more inclined to make additional poor decisions. This is how traders spiral into overtrading, not because they lack strategy, but because their mental capital has been depleted by acting without discipline. On the other hand, when a trader waits with intention, they conserve their psychological energy. They maintain clarity. They preserve emotional neutrality. They stay grounded in logic rather than reacting to rapid fluctuations. This calmness allows them to recognize true signals when they appear. They enter with confidence, manage the trade with objectivity, and exit with rationality rather than emotion. Another dimension of waiting is the strengthening of pattern recognition. When you sit through market movement without acting, you expose your mind to the unfolding of structure. You begin to notice rhythms, behaviors, and reactions that you would have missed if you were constantly in trades. Waiting gives you time to observe and analyze without the emotional bias of having money in the market. When you have a position open, every candle feels meaningful and your perception becomes distorted. But when you are flat and observing, you see the market for what it is, not for what you fear or hope it might become. This clarity improves your ability to identify genuine high-probability setups. Your relationship with the market becomes more analytical and less emotional. Waiting also protects you from the illusion of opportunity. Not every price movement is a setup, yet many traders act as if movement itself is an invitation. This belief leads to chronic overtrading. The market is constantly moving, but it is not constantly offering opportunity. High-quality setups are rare compared to the constant noise of intraday price action. If a trader cannot distinguish between movement and opportunity, they will enter repeatedly during low-probability conditions. The losses that follow are not caused by the market, but by the trader's inability to wait for alignment. When you internalize waiting as a protective behavior, you stop treating every fluctuation as meaningful. You stop feeling pressure to act simply because price is moving. You begin to evaluate the market through the lens of your predefined criteria instead of through emotional urgency. Waiting also reinforces discipline, which is the true foundation of long-term profitability. Discipline is not the ability to force yourself to follow rules. It is the absence of internal conflict when following them. When waiting becomes second nature, the rules feel not to rather than restrictive. You stop viewing discipline as something you have to do, and instead view it as something that protects you from unnecessary losses. This psychological shift transforms trading from a stressful activity into a controlled one. A disciplined trader is not rigid, they are aligned. Their actions match their beliefs, and their beliefs match the realities of the market. Waiting bridges this alignment by ensuring that actions only occur when conditions validate the beliefs. Protecting capital is not only about avoiding losses, it is about creating the conditions where gains can compound. A single high-quality trade can offset multiple low-quality ones, but the emotional damage caused by those low-quality trades often prevents the trader from holding the high-quality trade properly. They either cut profits early, fearing another mistake, or hesitate to take the trade altogether because their confidence has been weakened. By waiting for high-quality conditions consistently, you create an environment where each trade contributes to long-term growth. More importantly, your confidence becomes stable. Confidence built on discipline is resilient. Confidence built on impulse collapses quickly. Waiting also protects your trading identity. Every action you take reinforces a self-image. When you take trades outside your rules, you reinforce the identity of an inconsistent trader. When you wait for clear conditions, you reinforce the identity of a disciplined trader. Over time, your identity shapes your actions more powerfully than your strategy. Waiting ensures that the identity you reinforce is aligned with professionalism, patience, and consistency. Another critical aspect is that waiting reduces emotional volatility. Emotional volatility often exceeds market volatility in its ability to damage trading performance. When a trader does not wait, they experience constant emotional swings. They react to every tick, feel stress at every pullback, and panic at every reversal. This emotional turbulence clouds judgment and leads to irrational behavior. But when a trader waits calmly, they reduce emotional turbulence dramatically. They are not emotionally invested in every fluctuation. They can evaluate trends, structure, and context without feeling pressured. Their emotional state becomes stable, allowing for rational decision-making. Waiting is also what allows the market to reveal its intention. A signal is not just a pattern, it is the culmination of a behavioral sequence. The market must demonstrate certain conditions before they can be trusted. If you act too early, you're acting before the market has confirmed anything. This exposes you to unnecessary risk and increases the likelihood of being trapped in false moves. Waiting allows the market to commit. It gives price action space to validate your criteria. When the market reveals its intention clearly, your entry becomes strategic rather than speculative. Waiting protects the trader from noise, bias, fatigue, emotional disruption, and unnecessary risk. It is the silent filter that removes low-quality trades and preserves only the trades that truly align with your edge. It is the foundation upon which consistency is built. It is not a passive act. It is an act of protection, awareness, discipline, and clarity. Discipline in trading is not about forcing yourself to behave a certain way. It is about aligning your actions with a set of criteria that represent your edge, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Acting only when the market aligns with your criteria requires a level of internal stability that most traders never develop because it demands the ability to separate impulse from intention. The market is a constant generator of stimuli, and each tick, candle, or fluctuation invites an emotional reaction. Without discipline, those reactions turn into decisions. But decisions driven by emotion are almost always decisions that violate criteria. Discipline is the filter that ensures your actions reflect probability rather than emotion. A disciplined trader understands that a signal is not something they create, it is something they wait for. The market does not bend to desire, impatience, or fear. It moves according to its own structure, independent of what any individual wants. When a trader allows emotions to dictate actions, they implicitly assume that their feelings have relevance to the market, but feelings have no impact on price. Only criteria defined through observation and testing provide a genuine edge. Acting without criteria is an act of gambling, even if it feels rational in the moment. Acting with criteria is an act of alignment with probability. The emotional experience may differ, but the underlying math remains the same. Discipline becomes a special. Why important? Because the mind constantly tries to negotiate with uncertainty. When faced with ambiguity, the brain generates narratives designed to reduce discomfort. It tells you that this looks close enough to a setup, or the market is probably going to move in that direction anyway, or if I don't enter now, I'll miss the move. These narratives are not grounded in logic, they are grounded in emotional tension. Discipline is the ability to recognize these narratives as symptoms of discomfort rather than legitimate trading insights. When discipline is strong, you do not negotiate with your criteria, you do not reinterpret them, you do not stretch them to justify action. You let them guide you because you know they represent a long-term statistical advantage. The hardest part of discipline is not following rules when conditions are clear. The hardest part is maintaining alignment when conditions are almost, but not quite, right. This is where emotional temptation is strongest. The market may look like it is forming a setup, and you might see early signs of what you classify as your signal, but something essential is still missing. In these moments, impatience disguises itself as intuition. You may convince yourself that entering early means catching the move at a better price, but entering early means entering outside your criteria. The difference between a disciplined trader and an impulsive one is that the disciplined trader is willing to let the market move without them if the criteria are not met. The impulsive trader is not. Over time, this difference determines who survives. Another dimension of discipline is the willingness to accept that criteria are meant to protect you, not restrict you. Many traders view rules as limitations, as if they are preventing profit. But criteria are designed to filter out noise, reduce emotional interference, and guide behavior toward high-quality setups. When a trader resents their criteria, they inevitably start breaking them. This leads to inconsistency, which is the enemy of probability. Consistency is what allows an edge to express itself. Inconsistency destroys the statistical value of the system. Discipline reframes criteria from something restrictive to something empowering. When criteria are seen as protection, discipline becomes easier to maintain because it aligns with self-preservation. Consistent discipline also helps build psychological confidence. When you act according to your criteria, regardless of outcome, you reinforce trust in your process. This trust is essential because trading inevitably includes losing trades. Losses are emotionally tolerable when they occur within the boundaries of your criteria. They are part of the expectation. But losses outside your criteria generate shame, frustration, and self-doubt. These emotions accumulate and erode confidence. A lack of confidence leads to hesitation, fear, and increased sensitivity to uncertainty. Eventually, the trader becomes reactive rather than strategic. Discipline prevents that downward spiral by ensuring that every action supports long-term confidence. Discipline also enhances clarity. When you only act on predefined conditions, the market becomes simpler. Instead of interpreting every movement as a potential opportunity, you wait for specific confirmations. This removes mental clutter and prevents overanalysis. Many traders fail not because they lack skill, but because they become overwhelmed by too much noise. Discipline filters out noise automatically. It frees the mind to focus on relevant information rather than reacting to every fluctuation. When clarity increases, execution becomes faster, cleaner, and more decisive. Another major benefit of discipline is emotional neutrality. When you trade based on criteria, you remove ego from the process. You are no longer trying to force the market to validate your predictions. You are no longer trying to prove anything to yourself. You are simply aligning your actions with conditions that historically offer an advantage. This neutrality reduces emotional swings during trades. You stop feeling anxious when price fluctuates because you've already accepted the risk. You stop feeling overly excited during wins because they are simply part of the expectancy. Discipline stabilizes your emotional state, and a stable emotional state leads to consistent execution. Acting only when the market aligns with your criteria requires deep patience. Patience becomes a skill, not a strategy. It evolves from understanding that most of the market's movement is irrelevant to your edge. The average trader tries to engage with every shift, while the disciplined trader knows that true opportunity is rare. By waiting for alignment, you preserve energy, capital, and clarity. You avoid the psychological exhaustion that comes from overtrading. You remain focused, alert, and prepared for the moments that truly matter. When the signal finally appears, you enter with confidence instead of hesitation because discipline has prepared you for that moment. Discipline also reshapes your identity as a trader. Each time you act according to your criteria, you reinforce the belief that you are consistent, patient, and strategic. Over time, this identity becomes self-sustaining. Your actions shape your beliefs, and your beliefs shape your actions. Eventually, discipline is no longer something you try to maintain, it becomes who you are. At that point, following your criteria feels natural, and breaking them feels unnatural. This transformation is the foundation of a professional mindset. When a trader commits fully to acting only when the market aligns with predefined criteria, they step into a state of internal order. The chaos of the market remains, but the chaos within the mind diminishes. The trader becomes a participant who acts with intention, clarity, and alignment with probability. Discipline becomes the bridge between uncertainty and consistency, between potential and execution, between knowledge and results.